The quiet planet of Xara-9 had been largely untouched by human hands. Its barren, rocky surface was uninhabited by intelligent life, and its skies remained clear of ships, satellites, or any sign of human activity. For years, it had been a place of exploration for the few brave humans who dared to venture into the unknown reaches of space. But nothing could have prepared them for what they would find on this particular day. The sun was setting behind the jagged peaks of the planet's mountain range when a sudden flash of light illuminated the sky. The humans, stationed far from the nearby research base, noticed it immediately. At first, they thought it was just a meteor, a brief streak across the heavens. But the flash didn't die down as quickly as it should have. Instead, it grew brighter, larger, an explosion of unnatural light. On the ground, the team of scientists and explorers felt the vibrations as the ground itself seemed to tremble beneath their feet. Something massive had entered the atmosphere. They hurried to their equipment, trying to make sense of the readings on their scanners. There was a sharp spike in the readings. Something had crashed. Something big. A small team of scouts was sent out immediately to investigate. Their vehicles roared to life as they sped across the barren wasteland toward the site of the crash. The setting sun painted the sky in orange and red, casting eerie shadows over the land. The silence of the wasteland was suddenly broken by the hum of the engines, the only sound in the emptiness. As they drew closer to the crash site, the scouts couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unease. Something was off about the crash. The ship didn't look like any human-made vessel they had ever seen. Its sleek design and otherworldly shape seemed far more advanced than anything in their arsenal. It wasn't just the shape that was strange, it was the color. The ship was a deep metallic black, almost blending into the shadows of the night. The outer hull was covered in strange symbols that no one could understand. The crash had left a deep crater in the ground, and a trail of broken rocks and debris was scattered around the area. As the scouts approached, they saw smoke still rising from the wreckage, but there was no sign of life. They carefully made their way towards the ship, scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. The ship was clearly not of human origin. Its design was unlike anything the explorers had ever encountered. But just as the team prepared to inspect the wreckage, a strange sound echoed from within the ship. It was a low growl, almost like a warning. They froze in place, hearts racing. The noise came again, this time louder, followed by a scraping sound. The air around them felt thick with tension. Something was inside, something alive. "We need to get out of here," one of the scouts said, his voice shaky. But the rest of the team hesitated. They had to find out what had crashed here. Whatever it was no accident. The ship had been deliberately damaged. But by whom? And why? The decision was made. The scouts would push forward and investigate, despite the overwhelming sense of danger. They slowly approached the wreckage, their hands tightly gripping their weapons, just in case. As they peered inside the cracked hull of the ship, their eyes widened. In the dim light, they could see a massive form inside, its body covered in scars and strange markings. It was a creature unlike any they had ever seen before, a massive, muscular being, covered in a combination of fur and armored plating. The creature's chest rose and fell slowly, its breathing labored. It was alive, but barely. The scouts exchanged nervous glances. What was this thing? Who, or what, had sent it? And why had it been abandoned on this forsaken world? Before they could process the questions racing through their minds, the creature's eyes flickered open. Its glowing irises locked onto the humans with an intensity that sent a chill down their spines. It looked confused, disoriented. The humans could see the desperation in its gaze, as though it was aware of its fate but unable to escape it. One of the scouts, braver than the rest, took a step forward, his hand outstretched. The creature, still weak, growled low in its throat, but didn't attack. Instead, it seemed to be studying the human, recognizing something in him, something it could trust. Slowly, cautiously, the scout knelt beside the creature, speaking to it in calm, soothing tones. The other scouts watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to do next. The tension was unbearable. What was this creature? Why had it crashed on their planet? And most importantly, why was it still alive? It seemed like the ship had been purposefully destroyed, but for what reason? The aliens who had sent it, who had created it, had abandoned it. But why? The moment was heavy with uncertainty. No one moved as the human scout continued to extend his hand toward the alien. It was as if time itself had slowed, and all that mattered in that moment was the alien's decision. Would it attack or accept help? With a final, heavy sigh, the alien war dog lowered its head, allowing the human to gently touch it. It was a sign of trust, but also a sign of defeat. The creature had been left to die, but for some unknown reason, it had found itself in the hands of humans. And in that moment, the scouts realized that they might have just found something far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. A creature with abilities beyond their comprehension, capable of changing the course of history. They had saved it, but now they would need to figure out just how much this alien war dog would alter their fate. Little did they know, they were about to uncover a secret that would shake the very foundation of their understanding of the galaxy. The crash site was still silent, save for the hum of the vehicles parked around the wreckage and the faint crackle of static from the radios. The alien war dog lay still, its chest heaving with slow, labored breaths. The human scout, still crouched beside it, felt a mixture of awe and unease. He had never encountered anything like this before. An alien being, abandoned on a distant world, and now, in their hands, a creature that seemed to possess an untold power. The other scouts had gathered around cautiously, watching the scene unfold. It was clear that the alien war dog wasn't just a mindless beast. Its gaze, though wild and wary, carried a sense of intelligence. They had all seen enough alien species in their time as explorers, but nothing compared to this. The markings on its body, its sheer size, and the strength it radiated. This was not just another creature to study. It was something more. "We need to get it back to base," one of the scouts said, his voice urgent but low. "This creature could be valuable. We have to figure out what it is before any more ships come looking for it." The scout kneeling by the alien war dog nodded but didn't move. Instead, he kept his hand on its side, trying to calm it. The creature was clearly in pain, its eyes darting back and forth, unsure of its surroundings. It growled softly, its body tense, as though ready to strike at the slightest provocation. "Be gentle," another scout advised. "We don't know what we're dealing with." The human took a deep breath, his hand steady on the creature's fur. He spoke softly, his words meant to reassure. "It's okay. We're here to help." But the creature didn't respond with gratitude. Instead, it bared its teeth, a deep, menacing growl escaping its throat. For a moment, it seemed like the alien war dog might lash out. But then, just as suddenly as it had tensed up, the creature seemed to collapse inward, its body relaxing with exhaustion. The growl turned into a weak whimper, and it slumped its head down to the ground. The scout immediately saw the severity of the situation. He could feel the heat emanating from the alien's body, feverish and burning. "It's injured badly," he muttered, glancing at the others. "We need to move it, and fast." The team quickly organized. They used their equipment to carefully lift the war dog, placing it onto a makeshift stretcher. The creature, though large and powerful, was surprisingly docile now, as if it recognized that the humans were offering it a chance at survival. It didn't resist as they moved it, though its sharp, glowing eyes never stopped watching them. It was a silent observer, cautious but not entirely distrustful. As they made their way back to the research base, the war dog's eyes fluttered open and closed, each time with more difficulty. The humans worked quickly, trying to stabilize the creature's condition, but they could see the deep wounds along its body, signs of battle far worse than they had imagined. It looked like it had been through hell, a series of brutal, merciless encounters with whoever its captors were. And yet, despite its injuries, the war dog's spirit seemed unbroken. It was resilient, powerful, and determined to survive. Inside the research base, the crew moved fast. They rushed the alien war dog into the medical bay, where the chief medic, Dr. Helen Moore, was already preparing equipment. The team stepped back, giving her space but eagerly watching the process. Dr. Moore, a woman of few words but sharp intelligence, ran quick scans over the alien's body. Her eyes widened in disbelief as the readings popped up on her screens. "It's unlike anything I've seen," she murmured to herself, her voice tense with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "This creature is more than just an alien war animal. It's something else." She looked up at the others. "Its physiology is unlike any species we've cataloged before. It has a combination of traits from different known species, but there's more. Its biochemistry is unlike anything we know. Whatever this creature is, it's evolved to survive in the most hostile environments." One of the scouts, eager to find out more, asked, "Can we help it? Is it going to survive?" Dr. Moore didn't immediately answer. Instead, she turned back to the creature. The war dog's eyes were now half closed, and it seemed to be struggling to stay awake. Its breathing was shallow but steady. Slowly, it began to regain some strength, and the temperature of its body seemed to stabilize. But the wounds were still there, deep, vicious marks, as if it had been torn apart and left to die. "We'll do our best," she replied, "but we need to understand what happened to it, and more importantly, why it was abandoned." As the hours passed, the alien war dog began to stir. Its large form shifted slightly, and it let out a soft, low growl, though it was not in aggression. Instead, it was as though it was warning the humans that it was awake and aware of its surroundings. Despite the help, despite the medical attention, the creature remained on edge. But as the humans continued their efforts, they began to realize something that sent chills down their spines. The creature wasn't just a victim. It was a weapon. A powerful, deadly weapon that had been unleashed into their world by forces beyond their understanding. And as the alien war dog's eyes finally opened fully, the humans knew that this creature was not simply an animal that needed saving. It was a being with untold power, and soon, they would learn just how much of a role it would play in their future. Little did they know, they had just stumbled upon something far more dangerous and far more powerful than they had ever imagined. The alien war dog remained unconscious for hours, but its vital signs were slowly improving. The research base was buzzing with activity, but there was an underlying sense of unease. Everyone knew that they had just uncovered something extraordinary, but no one knew how far-reaching its implications might be. Dr. Moore stood by the alien war dog's side, her brow furrowed as she analyzed the data on the screen in front of her. Despite the creature's injuries, there was something undeniably fascinating about it. She had worked with many alien species before, but nothing like this. This was a different breed, something entirely unknown. There was a lingering thought in her mind, one that she could not shake off. Was this war dog just an accident, or was there a far more significant reason it had appeared on their doorstep? The war dog stirred again, its eyes flickering open. It blinked slowly, then seemed to take a moment to assess its surroundings. Its large, glowing eyes swept the room, taking in the humans around it. There was no fear in those eyes, only a sharp wariness, as though it was aware of its surroundings, but also calculating its next move. It was intelligent, more intelligent than any human had expected. One of the scouts, Sam, stood a little too close to the creature. His presence made the war dog stiffen, and its lip curled back, revealing its razor-sharp teeth. Sam froze, not daring to make a move. The tension in the room grew thick as everyone held their breath. "Easy now," Sam said softly, stepping back slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're not going to hurt you." To their surprise, the war dog relaxed, but it did not lower its gaze. It seemed to be assessing Sam, understanding his movements, and possibly even processing his words. It had been abandoned, left for dead by its own people, but now It was here, surrounded by humans. Its existence was being rewritten. Dr. Moore glanced over at Sam. "It's watching us. Don't provoke it," she warned, her voice calm but firm. "I need more data. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The medic stepped forward, offering the war dog some food. The creature's nose twitched at the scent, but it hesitated. It sniffed the food, unsure. This hesitation was enough to make the humans wonder. Was it so conditioned to violence and survival that it had forgotten how to trust? Or was it simply cautious? As the war dog took the food, Dr. Moore couldn't help but notice a strange glow beneath its skin, just along its back. She touched the panel on the wall, and a scanner whirred to life. As the scanner passed over the creature's body, an image of its internal structure appeared on the screen. Dr. Moore leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. The alien war dog wasn't just an animal. It had biological implants that ran through its veins, embedded deep within its body. The implants were unlike anything the team had ever seen. They pulsed with a strange energy, something beyond their comprehension. "What is this?" Dr. Moore murmured to herself. "This is not just an alien creature. It's been modified, augmented." One of the scouts, Rick, overheard and moved closer to the screen. "What are you saying, Doc? That this creature is some sort of cyborg?" Dr. Moore shook her head, her fingers dancing over the controls. "It's not exactly a cyborg. These implants, they are designed to enhance its abilities, to make it stronger, faster, and more deadly. It's a weapon." The room fell silent. The implications of her words hit hard. The war dog wasn't just a victim of its own species. It had been created for war. It was a living, breathing weapon, engineered for destruction. And now, here it was, in the middle of their research base, no longer under the control of its creators. "We need to find out who did this," Sam said, his voice tense. "Who would create something like this?" Rick clenched his fists. "More importantly, what are we going to do about it?" Dr. Moore turned to face the team, her eyes filled with determination. "For now, we observe. We learn everything we can about this creature, and we figure out how to keep it alive." The war dog, though injured, was showing signs of resilience. As it lay there, the steady rise and fall of its chest seemed to indicate that it was getting stronger. Its eyes, once clouded with pain and confusion, were now sharp and focused. It no longer seemed to be an animal that had been abandoned. It was something more. Outside, the storm was raging on. The winds howled through the base, and the sounds of distant thunder echoed through the hallways. The team, still unsure of what to make of the situation, gathered around the war dog, but they couldn't ignore the sense of danger that hung in the air. Somewhere out there, the creatures who had abandoned the war dog were still out there, and they would be coming for it. The humans had no idea who they were dealing with, but the war dog, with all its implanted power and enhancements, might be the key to surviving whatever threats were to come. As night fell, the team stood watch, their eyes on the war dog, not knowing what the future held. Would they find answers to the mysteries surrounding the alien creature, or would they find themselves caught in a battle with forces far beyond their understanding? One thing was certain. The humans had no idea what they had just unleashed. The following day, the base was abuzz with an urgency that hadn't been there before. The alien war dog, though seemingly docile, remained a mystery. Dr. Moore had stayed up all night, analyzing the data and running simulations, trying to make sense of the strange energy patterns and the foreign implants inside the creature. Each new finding only raised more questions. "Doc, you need to see this." Rick's voice broke through the silence of the lab. Dr. Moore glanced up from her work, momentarily startled by the urgency in his tone. She hurried over to where Rick stood, his eyes wide with disbelief. The screen before them displayed a series of scans that had just come in. The war dog's implants were reacting to the scans in real time, pulsing and shifting with an energy that was almost alive. "Is this normal?" Rick asked, his voice tinged with confusion. Dr. Moore leaned in closer, her breath catching in her throat. "No," she whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. "This is something we've never seen before." The implants weren't just enhancing the war dog's physical abilities. They were connecting to something far beyond the creature itself. It was as if the war dog was a living conduit, and the implants were part of a larger network, possibly across the stars. The energy was growing stronger by the minute, as if the war dog was receiving some kind of signal. "This is bad," Dr. Moore muttered under her breath. "The implants are sensing with something off-world." Sam, who had entered the room behind them, frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Moore said slowly, "that whoever created this war dog has access to an incredibly advanced network. This could be a military-grade operation. We may have just made first contact with an alien civilization, but this isn't the peaceful kind of contact we've hoped for." As if on cue, the war dog growled low in its throat, its eyes flashing with a sudden intensity. The humans froze, their attention snapping toward the creature. It had been lying still in its bed earlier, but now it was on alert. The room fell silent, and for a moment, all the researchers were paralyzed by the raw power emanating from the alien war dog. Rick took a cautious step back. "What's happening to it?" "It's receiving something," Dr. Moore said, her eyes wide with realization. "Whatever network it's connected to is sending signals. The energy levels are rising. And I think it's not just a signal, it's a command." The air in the room grew tense, the war dog's growl turning into a low, menacing growl. Its muscles rippled beneath its fur, and for the first time, it seemed to recognize the humans in the room as potential threats. Its eyes locked onto them with an intensity that made their hearts race. Suddenly, the sound of the base's alarms blared throughout the complex. The lights flickered, and the hum of the generators grew louder, almost as if the entire facility was responding to the surge of power from the war dog. "What the hell is going on?" Sam shouted, his eyes darting to the emergency monitors. Dr. Moore's eyes scanned the readouts quickly, her face paling. "We're not alone anymore. Whoever created this war dog, whatever civilization they belong to, they've just detected our presence." A wave of panic swept through the room, but Dr. Moore held firm. "We need to stay calm. We've only just scratched the surface of what's going on, but we have to be ready for whatever comes next." The war dog, sensing the rising tension, let out a sharp bark. It sounded almost like a call, a summons. The human team looked at each other, unsure what to do. The creature had been abandoned by its own people, but it was clear now that it was far from defenseless. In fact, it seemed to be more powerful than they could have imagined. The alarm echoed through the halls, growing louder as the energy from the war dog continued to build. Dr. Moore hurried to the communications panel, attempting to reach the command center. But there was no response. The communication lines were down. The situation was spiraling out of control, and the humans were now stuck in the middle of something far bigger than they could handle. Outside, the storm raged, but it wasn't just the weather that was about to make a violent impact. The war dog was no longer just a subject for study. It was a signal for something much darker. Something was coming, and the humans had no idea what they had just awakened. The lights flickered again, and the war dog's growl became even more aggressive. Dr. Moore stood frozen in place, eyes wide with fear and realization. The alien war dog, once abandoned and forgotten, was no longer a helpless creature. It was a weapon. And now, its creators knew exactly where it was. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The walls shook with a force that rattled their bones, and the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy, powerful, and deliberate, began to reverberate throughout the base. The war dog barked loudly, its body tense, ready for battle. It was too late to turn back now. The humans had made their choice. They had saved the war dog, and in doing so, they had triggered a chain of events that would lead them into the heart of an intergalactic war. What they didn't know was whether they could survive it. The war dog's power had only just begun to reveal itself, and the humans now had to prepare for what would come next. the arrival of a force unlike anything Earth had ever faced. The tremors grew stronger, shaking the entire base. The walls groaned as if they were buckling under some immense pressure. The sound of the approaching footsteps echoed in the halls, sending shivers down the spines of everyone present. But no one dared move. The war dog had gone completely still, its sharp eyes fixed on the door, ears perked, every muscle in its body tensed. It seemed to sense what was coming before anyone else did. Rick grabbed Dr. Moore by the shoulder, his voice urgent. "What the hell is happening? What's out there?" Dr. Moore's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She had no answers, only the growing certainty that whatever was coming would be unlike anything they had ever imagined. Her mind raced through every possibility. The alien war dog had been abandoned for a reason, but now, with its connection to whatever force lay beyond, the implications were terrifying. "We need to get out of here," she muttered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was too late. The enemy was already inside. The base's emergency lights flickered on, casting a sickly red hue over everything. The air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness fell over the room. Then, in an instant, the doors to the lab slammed open with such force that they flew off their hinges. Standing in the doorway was something the humans couldn't comprehend. Figures cloaked in shadow, their forms flickering and shifting like something not quite of this world. The war dog growled low, its body coiled, ready to spring. It had seen this before. It knew the threat. "Stay back," Dr. Moore ordered, stepping in front of Rick and Sam. Though her voice lacked conviction, her hand hovered over the weapon she'd taken from the guards, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. The creatures in front of them were far beyond anything Earth had ever encountered. The figures stepped forward, and the air seemed to pulse with an energy that made it hard to breathe. The humans could feel the weight of the alien presence pressing in on them, as if the very atmosphere around them was being altered. Rick raised his voice. "Who are you?" There was no response at first, just the slow, deliberate approach of the cloaked beings. But then one of them spoke, and the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating the very walls. "We are the creators of the war dog," it said in a low, guttural tone that reverberated through the air. "And you have made a grave mistake." The war dog growled again, its stance defensive, but it didn't move. The creatures didn't seem to be bothered by the threat of the animal. Instead, their focus was entirely on the humans, their dark eyes gleaming with an intelligence that was both alien and terrifying. "We have been watching," the voice continued, its tone cold and devoid of emotion. "Your actions have disturbed the balance of our forces. You thought you were saving this creature, but in doing so, you have called us to this world." Dr. Moore felt a chill run down her spine. She turned to the others. "They know everything." Rick's eyes were wide with shock. "What do they want with us?" The figure before them seemed to smile, though the expression was more like a bare gaping wound. "What we want," it said, "is what is ours." Before anyone could react, the air seemed to crackle with energy. The cloaked figures began to move closer, and the war dog snarled, its hackles raised. But something changed in the creature's behavior. Instead of attacking, it sat back, its eyes gleaming with a strange recognition. Dr. Moore's eyes narrowed. It's not afraid of them," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's more than that," Rick said. "It's understanding them. It's like they're communicating." As if to confirm Rick's words, the war dog stood up slowly and took a few cautious steps toward the figures. Its ears were forward, and its body seemed to relax, as though it had found a familiar presence. The cloaked beings watched silently as the war dog approached. The energy in the room thickened, growing heavier with every passing second. Dr. Moore could feel it, an oppressive weight that threatened to suffocate them all. The war dog stopped in front of the figures, its gaze locked on the leader. There was a moment of stillness, as if time had slowed, before the voice spoke again, softer this time. "You have released something greater than you could comprehend." The war dog was not just a soldier, It was a messenger, a signal of our coming. The war dog turned its head slightly to look at the humans, its expression unreadable. It was no longer just the animal they had rescued. It had become something else, a harbinger, a tool, or maybe even a weapon. The realization hit Dr. Moore like a freight train. We made a mistake," she muttered, her heart pounding in her chest. "We didn't just save it. We brought them here." The figures in front of them nodded slowly, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "And now," they said, "you will pay the price." Without warning, the air around them erupted with a high-pitched hum, and Dr. Moore's vision blurred. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and she could feel her knees weakening, the power of the alien beings overwhelming her senses. The war dog remained in place, unblinking, its eyes filled with an unreadable emotion. It had once been abandoned, left to die. But now, it stood at the center of a dangerous game that no one fully understood. The cloaked figures took one last step forward, and everything went dark. The darkness enveloped them entirely, leaving Dr. Moore, Rick, and Sam in an eerie silence. It was as though the entire world had been swallowed whole by the shadow. Even the hum of the alien energy had ceased, leaving behind an oppressive stillness that weighed down on their chests. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and the air felt thick, charged, as though something was building up. Dr. Moore's head was spinning. The last thing she remembered was the overwhelming energy from the alien figures. And then, nothing. She was on the floor, disoriented, with the taste of copper in her mouth. Slowly, she opened her eyes, blinking against the darkness. The dim light of the emergency power kicked in again, casting eerie, jagged shadows against the walls. She tried to sit up, but her body felt heavy, like every muscle had been drained of strength. It was the same for Rick and Sam. They too were on the floor, groaning, slowly coming to their senses. But the war dog was different. Standing in the center of the room, the war dog had transformed. It was no longer the injured, confused creature they had found in the wreckage. Its eyes now glowed with an intense ethereal light, an intelligence far beyond anything Earth had ever witnessed. The war dog's posture was upright, its form brimming with an unnatural power. The growl it emitted was low, but it carried a weight that made the floor vibrate. It wasn't a sound of aggression. No, this was the sound of something ancient, something that had been waiting for this moment. Dr. Moore's breath caught in her throat as she struggled to get to her feet. She turned toward Rick and Sam, trying to make sense of what was happening. This isn't just a dog anymore. It's different. Rick pushed himself up with a groan. "What do you mean, it's different?" It's connected to whatever those aliens were," Dr. Moore replied, her voice trembling. "But more than that, it's controlling the energy in this room. It's awake. It's responding to something we're not seeing." Sam, still groggy, shook his head and stood up. "What are you talking about? We're dealing with aliens, war dogs, and energy pulses. I can't keep up with all this." But Dr. Moore wasn't listening to him. Her eyes were fixed on the war dog, which was standing absolutely still now, like a statue, its focus intense and unwavering. It was no longer just the creature they had saved. It was their key, their connection to understanding the alien force they had stumbled upon. Then the room shifted. The walls groaned, and the ground shook once more, but this time it was different. The sound wasn't coming from the outside. It was coming from within the walls. The hum of alien technology grew louder, almost unbearable. The war dog's eyes flared, its stance unyielding. It seemed to recognize the threat, or perhaps it was calling something. Without warning, it turned to face the door, its fur standing on end. The glow in its eyes intensified, casting an unnatural light around the room. And then it moved. The creature sprinted toward the door, its speed so fast that it seemed to disappear in a blur. The humans barely had time to react as it bolted into the corridor. Dr. Moore scrambled after it, shouting for the others to follow. "Wait, don't let it go alone." But the war dog was already gone, disappearing into the hall like a shadow. The emergency lights flickered, casting brief flashes of light along the corridor, illuminating the darkened path ahead. The humans followed, running as fast as they could, but their steps felt sluggish compared to the war dog's agility. They didn't know what it had sensed or what it had awakened, but they had no choice but to follow. The alien threat was still out there, and now, more than ever, the war dog was their only chance of survival. They rounded the corner to the next hallway, and that's when they saw it. The cloaked alien figures were waiting for them. They hadn't anticipated the war dog's transformation. They hadn't counted on it breaking free from their influence. But now, it was clear. The war dog was more than just a mere creature. It was a weapon, a symbol of power, and it was leading them into the heart of the enemy's domain. The aliens did not speak this time. They merely stood, watching, waiting, as if they had seen this moment coming all along. Dr. Moore's heart raced as she tried to process what was happening. The war dog wasn't just a pet. It was their weapon, their savior, and perhaps their destruction. It was both the key to understanding what the aliens wanted and the tool that could defeat them. But as the cloaked figures stepped forward, she knew the truth. The moment of reckoning was at hand. The war dog snarled, its eyes locking onto the alien figures in front of them. The air around them crackled with energy, and Dr. Moore could feel the tension building. The aliens knew what was coming. They had no idea how wrong they were to underestimate humanity and its allies. "Let's see what this creature can really do," Rick said, his voice filled with determination. The war dog growled in response, its muscles tensing, ready to unleash the power it had held back for so long. And then the first shot rang out. The battle for survival had begun. The sound of the war dog's growl echoed through the metallic halls like a roar of thunder. The aliens before them, cloaked in shadows, stood still, almost as if they were waiting for something to unfold. Dr. Moore, Sam, and Rick stood at the edge of the hallway, breath caught in their throats. They had no idea what the war dog was about to do, but the alien figures were not going to wait. One of the aliens, towering and lithe, stepped forward, a long dark cloak billowing around its body. The air seemed to thrum with the power it held, as though it could bend time itself. Dr. Moore instinctively took a step back, her mind racing through every scenario she could think of, none of which seemed promising. The figure raised its arm, and the atmosphere grew colder, denser. It was preparing to strike. But the war dog wasn't just standing there. In one swift, fluid motion, the war dog lunged forward with a speed no human could follow. It was faster than anything they had seen, moving like a blur of shadows, an unstoppable force. The alien didn't have time to react. In an instant, the war dog had its claws wrapped around the alien's arm, crushing it with a force that echoed through the walls. The sound of bones cracking filled the air as the alien howled in agony. But it wasn't over yet. The war dog's eyes burned with an intensity that wasn't of this world, and it let out a low, guttural growl as its power surged. The air around them shimmered, crackling with energy as the war dog's fur began to glow with an ethereal light. It wasn't just the creature attacking now. It was as if it had tapped into some higher power, a force that connected it to the very energy that surrounded them. The alien shrieked in pain, but it couldn't break free. Then, with a roar, the war dog tore into the alien's cloak, revealing what lay underneath, not flesh, but a complex suit of alien technology, held together by energy pulses that seemed to stabilize the being itself. As the war dog's claws shredded the fabric, sparks of energy flew in all directions, lighting up the hallway in an eerie glow. The other aliens were momentarily stunned, their cold eyes widening in shock. The war dog had caught them off guard. They had expected to subdue it easily. After all, it was just an abandoned creature, weak and broken, right? But what they didn't realize was that this creature wasn't just a dog. It was a force of nature, a creation they could never have predicted. It had been waiting for this moment, waiting to show them the true meaning of strength. But the battle wasn't over. With a collective hiss, the other aliens began to move, a shimmering aura of deadly energy surging from their bodies. They raised their hands, and blue energy bolts shot toward the war dog, sparking against the walls with violent crackles. Dr. Moore and the others dove to the ground to avoid the blasts. But the war dog, now fully awake, dodged with impossible precision, its body a blur of motion. Every bolt that came its way was either avoided or deflected, as though the war dog could sense them before they even fired. Then, the war dog retaliated. With an explosive leap, the war dog pounced on the second alien, its claws raking across the creature's face, tearing through its protective layers like paper. The alien roared in fury, its energy shield flickering under the onslaught, but it was too late. The war dog's power had surpassed anything they could have imagined. Dr. Moore looked on in awe. The war dog was no longer a pet. It was a weapon, and they had unleashed it in the most dangerous way possible. She quickly turned to Rick and Sam, both of whom were still stunned. "We need to move, now," she urged. "This battle won't last long. The others will come." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed Rick's arm, pulling him forward. They had to escape, but there was no time for that. As they moved, another alien figure appeared from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an ominous red light. This was it. This was the fight they had all been waiting for. The war dog wasn't backing down. It had tasted blood, and now it was hunting. It was no longer just a creature from Earth. It was a force to be reckoned with, something no alien army could defeat. The war dog's strength surged once more, and it charged toward the remaining enemies, its every move filled with purpose. As the first alien collided with the war dog, there was a brief moment of silence, a pause in time, before the impact shook the entire ship. The energy fields crackled, and the aliens' shocked expressions were quickly replaced with fear. The war dog had become something far beyond their understanding, something beyond their control. Dr. Moore, Sam, and Rick watched as the war dog engaged in battle, each move calculating, every strike perfect. They realized that they weren't just witnessing a fight. They were witnessing the rise of something far greater than themselves. The power of the war dog was undeniable. It wasn't just humanity's ally. It was their ultimate weapon. The aliens had underestimated them all, thinking they could control everything. But in the end, it was the humans, and their unexpected companion, that would prove victorious. With each blow, each move, the war dog revealed just how far it had come, and how much further it would go. The aliens were no longer in control, and this was just the beginning.